Okay, so we all know the story of the crucifixion, right? I mean, it's one of the most famous events in human history, but what if the main point, the central message, isn't what we've always been taught? In this explainer, we're diving into a really different interpretation, one that says the most important event didn't just happen on the cross, but that it was this huge, profound split, a schism that happened inside the consciousness of every single person who was there watching.
Yeah, for literally 2,000 years, the entire narrative has been about an act of salvation. But what if? What if that laser focus on salvation has actually made us miss a really critical lesson? A lesson not just about history, but about ourselves, about our own human nature, right now.
So, this interpretation gives us a new term to think about. It's called the carnal reality divide. And the core idea here is that the crucifixion wasn't something that just happened to Christ, it happened within the crowd. Just try to picture it, a deep crack, like an earthquake, just forming in their collective consciousness, violently ripping apart what they thought they believed spiritually from the absolutely horrific physical reality they were standing there witnessing. All right, so let's get into it. How does this actually reframe the central event? Well, what it does is it shifts the entire focus away from just being a one-time historical transaction and turns it into this timeless, almost uncomfortable look at human psychology, and specifically our capacity for just going along with things. Okay, look at this. The difference here comes down to two tiny little words, for versus because. The traditional view we all know is that Jesus died for our sins. You can think of it like a past payment, a debt settled. But this view, it argues something much more immediate, much more present, that he was crucified because of our sin, a present, active complicity that was happening right there in that very moment. And with that one little word change, the whole story shifts. The crucifixion becomes less about some kind of divine payment plan and more like a giant mirror held up to the crowd, exposing humanity's role in the whole tragedy. Suddenly, the responsibility is placed squarely on the shoulders of those who just stood by and let it happen. So you gotta ask, right? How on earth did they get to that point?
Well, that brings us to what this source material calls the sin of acquiescence. And really, you can just think of it as the sin of, well, going with the flow, the sin of not speaking up when you know you should. For most people there, it probably wasn't some active, malicious choice. No, it was a passive one. So let's see how this all unfolded. The argument here is pretty powerful. It's that the people had essentially outsourced their conscience. They had become completely 100% reliant on their ministers and priests to tell them what was real, what was true. And this reliance, well, it created this huge, dangerous vulnerability. It became a wide open gateway for deception, which ultimately allowed them to just ignore the truth that was standing right in front of them. And you can really see the tragic chain reaction laid out here. It's like a domino effect. First, you start relying on your leaders for everything. Then, that opens the door for deception and lies. And that, in turn, leads to this hardening of hearts, this almost willful refusal to see any other truth. And what's the final, inevitable link in that chain? Complicity. Complicity in condemning someone you know is innocent. And boom, that's the moment of crisis. The deed is done. And, just like the quote says, the split is finalized. At that point, the people are left with this just horrifying internal division, a giant chasm between their supposed faith and the ugly reality of what they just took part in.
But hang on, because the argument goes even deeper. It suggests that all those strange physical events reported in the Gospels, the darkness, the earthquake, they weren't just random dramatic details. No, they were powerful, real-world symbols of this exact spiritual split we've been talking about. Think about this one. The Gospels record that at the exact moment of Christ's death, the veil in the temple, this massive, super thick curtain separating the holy place, was torn in two, from top to bottom. Now, according to this interpretation, that was no accident. It wasn't just a dramatic flair for the story. It was a physical sign, a message from the heavens.
What was it a sign of? It was a physical manifestation of that spiritual tear that had just ripped through the collective consciousness of the people. It's like the inner world of their hearts and the outer world of their most holy place were perfectly mirroring each other. As within, so without.
So you've got these two splits happening at the exact same time, mirroring each other. On one hand, the temple veil splits. This signifies the end of the old, corrupt religious system's authority. And at the same time, Christ's body, which is often called the true temple, is split by death, leaving the entire body of believers totally fractured and unable to function. It's like the physical world was literally screaming what was happening in the spiritual world.
Okay, so if that's the diagnosis, this deep, painful spiritual divide caused by passive belief, then what's the cure? Well, that brings us to the final part, the call to action that's baked right into this whole interpretation.
The source gives us another new concept here, and it's called exoda. And yeah, it's meant to sound a lot like Exodus. It literally means to be drawn out by the word. So you can think of it as a call to leave behind that state of just passively believing whatever you're told and to start a journey into active discernment, into finding out the truth for yourself.
So when you look at it this way, the core lesson of the crucifixion becomes this new exodus, a deeply personal exodus for each of us. The challenge is to heal that internal split inside ourselves. And how do we do that? By rejecting blind reliance on any institution and instead choosing to embody the truth for ourselves, to really live it. That's the only way to make sure that sin of acquiescence can never take root again.
And all of this really leaves us with a pretty provocative question, one that goes way beyond just this one story. After seeing just how easily passive belief can slide into active complicity, we really have to ask ourselves, right? In any area of our lives, is just believing something ever really enough? Or does true faith, true conviction always demand action?